Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. Welcome to our Black History Month speaker panel. My name is Nadira Bar, and I'm the anti racism consultant here at Northwest College. The topic of today's conversation is the role that underrepresented groups within academic institutions are expected to play in creating and implementing EDI strategies. This is obviously a very timely conversation here at Northwest College, as myself and my colleague Wade King are tasked with creating an EDI strategy and an anti-racism strategy. So therefore, I don't want to take up too much time. I would like to introduce our speaker. Our speaker today is Dr. Ogbogu, who is here as our Black History Month speaker and the last of our Black History Month panel speakers. He is an associate professor at the Faculty of Law, within the faculties of Law, Pharmacy, and Pharmaceutical Studies, and a Katz Research Fellow in Health Law and Science Policy at the University of Alberta. Dr. Ogbogu is a nationally recognized expert in the fields of health law, public health law, science and law and bioethics. So please help me virtually welcome Dr. Ogbogu here to Northwest College. Hi, Doctor.
Hi, thank you, Nadira. Thank you for the kind introduction. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today talking to the Northwest community about what you've described as a very timely topic. I agree, it is really timely, and it's something we need to talk about because it will hopefully help govern our actions as we navigate our way through this period of racial reckoning and an attempt to rectify what's a long history of lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our institutions. So I'm very pleased to be here today. And what I'm going to try and do is, in about 10 to 15 minutes, just take you through what is really just a whirlwind of ideas around the role that persons who are underrepresented are expected to play in the current climate where institutions are really wanting to advance EDI initiatives, and how that role actually represents an opportunity in many ways, but also a burden in many ways. And what I really like to spend more time doing after I've taken you through this, through what I have prepared, is to take your questions and really engage in a discussion about your experiences. I hope that many people who are listening, that the things I tell you today will resonate with you. It may resonate with you as somebody who's underrepresented in the institution that you're in, or it may resonate with you if you're somebody who isn't, who's not a part of an underrepresented group, but who is mindful of what's going on right now and want to know how you might support persons in that category. So the title of my talk is Academia and the Catch-22 of Diversity Work for the Only ... And by only, I mean, if you're that one and only person who's a Black person, or who's an Indigenous person, or who's a person of color in your institution, or if you're one of two or one of a few, I am the only one in my faculty, for example, the only Black professor in my faculty. I'm the only one who's been ever hired full-time permanent in my faculty. So I know very well what it means to be the only person. And so much of what I'm going to tell you today draw from my experiences, but also draw from what I've heard other people who are the only or one of few in institutions around the country. So as a starting point, I want to talk about sort of the "we need you" problem that has come up in this period, in this current climate, after the killing of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, and Black Lives Matter movement, and this period that I call our period of racial reckoning. There's been a high demand in many institutions, especially in universities, for people who have the experience of racism to advise institutions and units within those institutions about their experiences and about what they're going through, and about how perhaps these institutions can devise policies to change the problem to address the problem of underrepresentation, and to try and make these institutions more equitable, more inclusive, and more diverse. So I call it the "we need you" problem because obviously there's an assumption that's made right off the bat that if you're a Black person, you will understand some aspects of the problem. And this, to me, has been the first reaction I've seen institutions take. They turn to their Black person or to their Black persons to try and understand what's going on and to try and get some insight on how they might solve it. And I think this manifests in many ways. And it's almost like a reflex. They don't actually think about it. I think it's actually quite problematic. Even though it might seem like it's an opportunity for the underrepresented to contribute to what's going on, or even though it also might seem as if, oh, finally, they are mindful of this, and I think this is a good opportunity for me to tell them how I feel. I think it can be problematic in many ways. But here are the ways in which it manifests. There's all the equity, diversity, and inclusion committees that have been formed, and they turn to this, to the only person who represents, a minority, or the only Black person, and they say, we need you to be on this committee. So there's that. And then there are the other committees that exist ordinarily within an institution. So every faculty, every unit, every college will have some committees that do a variety of things, not necessarily related to the issue of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Those committees typically do not have broad representation as a default. But in the current climate, they start to look at themselves and they go, well, this doesn't seem like something we should be doing anymore. This is not the kind of image we want to be representing. So let's find a Black person, an Indigenous person, or another person of color to sit on this committee. And so that's another kind of work. I have had many requests to sit on committees that is as if people just discovered me, even though I've been around for a long time. So they asked me to come sit on a committee. I think these two things I've described are forms of tokenism. Forming an equity, diversity, and inclusion committee and getting the Black person, the only Black person you have on there, is not true inclusion. It's not true diversity. It represents work for that person. Same with getting a Black person, the only Black person you have, onto the committees that you have. Then there's the committee that you were already on. You were already serving on a committee. And the committee had nothing to do with EDI previously. In fact, you've been trying to get them to think about things in an inclusive way, and they've just ignored you all these years. But they now have an interest in that. So they try to turn every discussion into an EDI discussion, and you're right in the middle of it. And you then become the EDI, both the EDI symbol and, of course, the person that they turn to ask all the questions about things to do with EDI. So I think this is a tokenization of you within the context of a committee that you were already on. It morphs slowly into an EDI committee of sorts. Then there's the non-committee committee. This is where your colleagues approach you, or your dean approaches you, or the head of your department approaches you, and everybody now just wants your take on this. And your take, they take to be the take of Black people. You clearly are the voice of and I'm being sarcastic with that. You clearly are the voice of Black people, and they now want to listen intently to what you have to say. This is another form of tokenization, I think, as well, because they ought to understand that you don't represent the voice of Black people as a whole. So in many ways, and I'm sure there are things you might want to add to this when we get to the discussion period about your experiences, and I'm sure some of this will resonate with you. But these are the things that have happened to me and which represent forms of work that nobody wants to talk about as work. It is work either explicitly because they've asked me to join something I wasn't part of before, or it's work because they're now taking advantage of me being there, and they're imposing on my time without really thinking of it as work, and it's obviously uncompensated. But also, it leaves me with confusion. I know it's a burden, and I want to resist it. But if I do, am I losing the opportunity to actually be heard? And then there's the one I think is actually one of the worst forms of this, the responding to performative inclusion work. This is when they come up with a rash of ideas. There's so many ideas that came up in the last year, after the movement started, so many people had so many ideas, and many of those ideas were just them wanting to feel in touch with what was going on and feel like they were doing something. Much of it was very performative, but you have to respond to those because they're asking you about it, and you're having to respond to it. And this performative inclusion work, obviously, if you're somebody who doesn't occupy a position of power within your organization, you might try to push it away, but they then start to make it look as if you don't want to contribute to solving the problem. So it creates a source of tension as well for persons who are underrepresented in an organization. Now, of course, as I said before, I am not the voice of the culture. None of us who are the only or one of few are the voice of the culture. But when they come to you and they ask you for your opinion and you offer it, it allows them to cop out. They can say, we have now got the perspective, the Black perspective or the indigenous perspective. And it allows them to delay acknowledgement of the underrepresentation and of the systemic racism. And it might actually excuse them from doing something to fix the diversity problem or the under-inclusion problem. So as I've said, this represents an opportunity and a burden for me, and I'm sure that resonates with you as well. But that's because I actually have a choice to decide if it's going to be an opportunity or a burden for me. In some cases, you might be in an organization where you don't have that choice, where they just tell you to be part of the committee, or they ask you your opinion, and you don't have enough power to be able to say, sorry, this is not my job. I don't want to do it. I have been able to do that because I'm a tenured professor. In fact, I was in a committee that morphed into some kind of EDI committee, and I resigned from it. I said, no, I don't want to be on this committee because I know what's going to happen. So I'm going to ask to be out. Some people might not have that choice, and then it represents work for them that they have not been asked if they actually want to do. The other way that this is work is that in this moment, they're not actually allowing Black people to grieve what's happening within our culture. Our brothers and sisters have been killed and are still being killed. And many of us just want some time to ourselves, some time to reconcile ourselves to what's going on, and to reconcile ourselves to our culture as Black people and to the things that bind us. But these institutions that are steeped in systemic racism don't recognize that. They want us to be part of this work too. And so there's that emotional work of trying to be in a space you don't want to be in, while grieving the fact that you cannot be in a space that you actually want to be in, that I also want to highlight. And I'm sure this will resonate with some people as well, because I've had that. Again, because I have some power within my institution, I've been able to resist this, largely by saying, sorry, I'm not into this right now. But I know people who have not had that choice, who have been forced to get into the work just because they don't have the choice of saying, I just want to be by myself. I know, in fact, one situation where some Black students that I know said, we don't want to, get involved in these activities that you're planning. We just need time to ourselves. And, the person that we're saying this to actually didn't listen and was very sort of hell-bent on getting them to do the work, even though they were saying, we just want time to ourselves because there's so much going on right now with respect to being Black, and we just want to be able to sort of grieve that and reconcile ourselves to that. The other way that this is work is that in this moment, a lot of these institutions want to do their EDI work that they've come up with. They don't realize that we as Black people have been doing anti-racism work for all of our lives. We do it with our bodies, with the fact that we're underrepresented, with how we position ourselves in these institutions, with how we talk to people who are coming behind us, with how we hold down the ladder for them to come up. I have been doing anti-racism work as far as I can remember. I could be in my office and the Black students that we have come to my office to talk to me about issues that affect them long before this moment happened. And there is something to be said for people now realizing that anti-racism work needs to be done, but assuming that we were not doing anything before. So now that they are ready to work, we have to be ready to work, even though we have been doing this work. And we are actually full up on the work that we're doing. We've built it into our normal work duties. So what they're now doing is layering on top of that their own anti-racism work, which in many cases is not actually consistent with our anti-racism work. It's theirs, not ours. Much of theirs is performative. We don't want to do that, but they're taking us away from what we actually want to do. So that's their anti-racism work, not ours. And they are not mindful to that. But also, they just tell us what they want to do. They don't actually ask our opinion on certain the tasks. They just say, look, we've decided to form an EDI committee. What if that's not the solution, right? And we want you to be on it. What if an EDI committee is not the solution to the problem? They don't at least discuss it with us. They just pose the work they want us to do and expect us to just follow along. So I hope I've covered the many ways that this manifests. So let me now turn to some of the solutions to this. So lately I've been talking about the idea of seed in space, and I gave a talk a few days ago where somebody also came up with the term of seed in space, second sense, so seed space and seed space. So I think what these institutions need to do is to recognize that they are the problem. They are not the solution. These institutions are steeped, as I said, in systemic racism. You can't solve a problem you can't solve the problem that you represent. These people putting themselves in a position to solve it are the ones who created the problem. They're the ones who allowed it to fester. Your colleagues in your department who have allowed you to be the only Black person in the institution are not the solution. They may be allies, but they are part of the problem because they sat silently for a very long time, allowing the institution to exist in that way without saying anything. So they shouldn't take over the solution. The first step to a true solution is to admit that they're the problem, that they don't know much about how to solve it, and they need to move away from the space of power and authority and bring in people who can actually solve it. So that requires them not taking charge, but providing the resources and finding the people who can take charge. And that will reduce the burden on you as the only person, because they have to go get someone from outside who can actually help them solve the problem. I think most institutions need to start by doing an audit of their policies and an audit of their attitudes towards EDI, and then finding people who are independent people to do that audit, and then hiring people who they can resource to do that. If they're not ready to do that, then everything that they're doing, I think, is largely performative. So they have to bring in an expert. And where they do call on you, I think it should be for you to relate your experiences, and they shouldn't be asking you for solutions or to be part of the solution unless you're willing to. And when they do, they have to recognize that you're doing that. You're doing work in the many ways that I've described it. You're doing work. This is not what you were hired for, but that's what you're doing now. They also need to recognize the work that you did before they came up with their work, and then empower you and reward you for all of that. You're probably underpaid in your work because they've never paid you for what they now recognize as important. So this is the time to renegotiate your salary and get paid for the work that you've always done and the work that you're now doing. If they truly want to make a change, they have to recognize that it's a burden on you and they have to pay you for it. But I prefer if they didn't impose on the only one that they have. What would be better is for them to actually do cluster hires. Hire a bunch of people who have that experience, hire more Black people and hire them in clusters. I know this is, probably a difficult proposition in this climate where everyone is talking about cuts to the education system. But if you're serious about the commitment to EDI, you have to get more people in the room, and you have to then create spaces for those people to feel like they have a community and be able to contribute to solving the problem. If you're not hiring, then you need to create a community within your institution that brings all the Black people in the different units together to solve some of these problems. Then these institutions need to recognize that this is going to be uncomfortable, and they need to stop being defensive. The work gets harder when, if you tell them the truth, they get defensive and check out. That is something I've noticed. It was the case that when, at the height of the movement, I will say things in my institution, and there'll be, a few people who agree with me or who support me. Today, if I say something, there's just awkward silences. It's getting harder to actually continue to be the one voice who keeps saying we need to pay attention to these issues. And I know they're now starting to see it, starting to get defensive. They're now starting to want to escape from the room. They can't handle how uncomfortable this work is. So it is an additional burden to me, an additional work to me to try and deal with their feelings. So it'd be nice if I didn't have to do that. I already have a lot on my plate. It'd be nice if I don't have to add caring about their feelings. So I think if institutions really want change, they have to reckon with getting uncomfortable and not being so defensive. And then lastly, celebrate. And celebrate in a real way, in a way that's meaningful. I'm not talking about putting up, posters on the wall of the one Black person they know, or, finding Martin Luther King photos to put on the wall. I'm talking about celebration in a real way. You celebrate by changing your institution in a very fundamental way to attract people who were not there before. Somebody asked me a question at an event I was presenting yesterday. How do we get Black people to, we've been putting out ads, but we don't have Black applicants. And I'm like, no Black person wants to come to your institution. It's too white. It's not that they haven't seen your ad. It is that they don't like your institution, and we don't just go places where we're not going to be comfortable. So the ideal celebration that I'm putting forward here is the idea of actually creating spaces where Black people can come in and feel like, yes, this is a space that I'll be comfortable in, a space that I think I can contribute ideas and have them acknowledged and accepted, and a place where I don't have to be the only one doing the work of trying to address what we're facing in this historical moment. So that's all I have to tell you. I hope I have left enough, seeds of ideas with you to generate a good enough discussion. But I'm now happy to hear from you and to see if what I've said resonates with your experiences, and if you have, things to add or things to take away, or disagreements that you'd like to express. But thank you for listening to me.
First of all, can I just say thank you so much for your presentation, for your insight, for also your solution and your recommendations that you brought forward. A lot of it is, I think, timely for Norquest, but also more broadly in the general conversation of tokenizing the only racialized minority in the room. So I have a few questions that I'd like to bring up first, and then we will throw it to anybody who's watching with the live stream. So one of the things that you had brought up was in regards to people getting pushed into this space, and you having the luxury and the privilege of sort of being able to walk back, but some of our colleagues being sort of pushed into this. So as, let's say, Black staff, like a Black individual in an institution where you might not have the ability to push back, how do we what is the language that we can use to let leadership know that this is not our job, and additionally, this is adding to our workload in a way that isn't compensated? So what language can Black staff use to articulate this without creating any tension?
It's a tough one, because many of these people in leadership are very motivated, and sometimes they think they're actually doing the right thing. They are motivated in a way that they think is positive. Their heart's in the right place, if you will. So I think one way to go about it will be to find powerful voices within your institution who are also good allies, who understand the problem of the burden on Black members of the community, who can take the message to them. I'm very good with using my allies within my department. In fact, I meet with them from time to time. And I sort of lay the seeds of ideas about how this is going. And even though I have some protection, I use them all the time to sort of bounce off ideas about things and they usually offer to transmit it to other people, and I go, yes, please, if you can talk to the dean, that would be great. So that's one strategy. You could work through people who are true allies in your department, and if you don't have any of those, I think you just have to decide what crosses the line for you. And I think you can always go to the persons in charge and say, well, here's my suggestion on how we might do this better. I think they might be minded to listen to, I am not the voice of the culture. That's why I usually start from, you can't expect me. It's actually racist to think that one Black person represents the voice of, Black people are as varied in their ideas and manifestations as you're going to get. So I can't represent the voice of an entire culture, even if it's one culture. Even that's even questionable if it's one culture. So that's how I go about it. If you don't have allies to work through, you just go directly and explain it to them in as diplomatically as possible, hoping that they listen.
First of all, thank you for that. And my other, maybe jumping off of that point, if there is an underrepresentation, let's say there is an institution that wants to take on EDI work, but within their own organization, they don't have the capacity or they don't have the representation, how do you nudge them that although you don't have the individuals in-house, there's so much research out there that you can learn from? How do you sort of link the fact that, because you don't have the people in-house, that doesn't mean there's a lack of voices or a lack of opportunity to engage in this conversation?
I think that should be the first thing, when you're approached to contribute, that you actually say. And you should insist that that's the right way to go about it. And I did that in my own context, and I think that was the right thing to do. The first thing I did when this whole thing happened was I knew what was coming. I knew people were going to start asking me for all kinds of things. And I've as you can imagine, I have had a ton of those requests. But within my own faculty, what I did was I went to our dean and I said, hire an independent auditor and get him to audit your policies and advise you on what next to do. That was rejected. But it freed me from, at least it meant that I had been proactive. I had gone and I said, I am not the person. There's someone else out there. And if you don't take that advice, that's on you. That way I was able to then excuse myself from the rest of it. Now, this may not be possible in every organization, obviously, and I'm mindful of that. But I think even when they're saying to you, what do you think? You go, well, I don't have that expertise, but I can refer you to the people who do. Right. And if you say that enough, at some point, they're going to leave you alone. But of course, what you might find is that they don't want to look that up. I'm not actually sure that having you in the room is about hearing from you. It's about making it seem as if they are listening to Black people. So I'm not even sure that they were, because I've been in the room where I've said things which, I knew were just promptly ignored after. I think right now what they're doing is having Black people in the room so they can make it seem as if the room is inclusive. I'm not sure they've reached the idea stage of this equation yet, because I'm not seeing a lot of changes in my institution, for example. So I'm not sure the ideas that even the few Black people are given to them. Like at the University of Alberta, Black students associations wrote calls to action. Black faculty members wrote calls to action. I haven't seen those calls to action realized yet. So I think they just are looking to have an inclusive looking room, but they have not got to the idea stage yet.
Thank you for that. My other question would be in let's say our Black colleagues that are in positions of leadership and in positions of power, how do they sort of expand the conversation to also include Indigenous perspectives and I'd say outside of just the representation of our Black colleagues and our Black perspective, we need to include this conversation if you want to talk about the Canadian context of racism.
Right. No, I completely agree with that. And I think we have to view the problem of racism for what it is. It's a problem that does not just attach to Black people. And so I think it should be addressed as a problem that affects everyone that it affects, as opposed to a Black problem, right? And I think one way to go about that is to always be mindful of what the core problem is, and how that problem, which is racism, and how that manifests among these groupings that have been created to describe the problem. If you come down to the individual level, nobody wants to be in a position where they're experiencing racism. But because we've been now sort of classified as groups, Black, Indigenous, persons of color, there's a tendency to think that we have to sort of approach it from that perspective. What I want is for racism to go away. I don't want it to affect anyone. And so if I'm talking about it and I'm fighting against it, it's a problem that I'm focusing on. And I'm trying to solve it for whoever it affects, right? But there might be sort of unique manifestations of that racism as it affects these different groupings. And I think we also have to be mindful of that, right? And where there are unique manifestations, you can talk about unique manifestations, but keep your eye on the ball. The problem is racism. And whoever it affects, it needs to go away, right?
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Maybe shifting the conversation a bit, we talked about, I wanted to have your perspective on Black colleagues and Black instructors and people in positions in faculty often have to act as a translator between students and the institution, and the dichotomies and the tensions that exist between the two. How has institutions added to this burden by not creating adequate resources for students and making sort of our Black professors or our Black instructors really their only allies in institutions?
It's awful, really. It's a big part of the work I'm doing right now and I've always done. But I don't do it because my institution expects me to. I feel I do it almost out of a sense of like identification with what it means for someone to be a Black student in an institution that's very white. And I think there's a natural pull that you have towards the problem and towards trying to be the person who speaks out for these students. So in many ways, I don't consider it work so much as I consider it like something that's a necessity. It's what I described as the anti-racism work I was doing before this moment. It's a necessity because they come to me for a reason. And they come to me and they don't even think about me not listening, right? And I don't even think about me not listening or me not helping. There's a pull that happens that I don't even think about it. But in many ways, it's at the end of the day, it's work. And if there's enough of us who are doing that work, we probably wouldn't mind. We probably wouldn't write in an annual report saying this is what we did. The problem now is that these institutions are now alive to it and they're adding to the burden, right? They're now formalizing it in ways that they didn't ask us if this is how we want to do it. And they're making us the ones who have to do that work. That's why it's problematic, because we now have to answer to them. So it's instead of doing it out of just a necessity and a love for the connections that I build with people like me, I'm not doing it to answer to somebody who's trying to get credit for it. And that's, I think, what the tension is for me. But be that as it may, I think, we have to help each other. We really are the only, we only have ourselves, and a Black person comes to me, tells me something, I don't get defensive. I understand right away where they're coming from. I don't doubt the racism. I don't question their experiences. I don't tell them that maybe it's this other explanation, because I know, where it's coming from. I can acknowledge their feelings and I can relate to their feelings, and I can sort of make the process easier. So I'm not going to stop doing that work. I just need institutions to recognize that it's work that I'm doing, and they don't need to add to it. They don't need to take credit for it, and they need to allow me space to be able to do it.
Thank you for that. And so maybe jumping off of that question, how do we get institutions, specifically academic institutions, to recognize and uplift the pre-existing anti-racism work that has already been going on, instead of focusing in on sort of these new strategies and saying, we will create this from scratch? Because there have been a lot of, people in the institution doing a lot of this work. So maybe it's two questions. How do we get people to indicate that what they have been doing is work? And then how do we get the college to accept that this is work and this is what needs to be scaled up?
Right. So the first thing is they have to get used to sort of having conversations first before they actually come up with ideas of what to do. As I said, many of these institutions are the problem. It's funny to me how when this movement started, they took off their racism hat and put on the solution hat. I'm like, wait, no, you guys are the racism. You're the problem. You can't just start solving, right? It is you that created the problem and have ignored the problem for ages. So you can't just be the solution. So they need to actually have a conversation first. And that conversation needs to start by actually realizing that they are the problem. So the first thing is do an audit. Actually get someone to come in, because they typically don't listen to people within their own institutions. So get someone to come in and tell you, gosh, you're really bad. Or this is how far you've come. And then sit down and have a conversation with people about the work that they're doing. It is funny to me how nobody at my institution ever asked me, how much anti-racism work were you doing before now? They just woke up one day and like, oh, Baka, can you join an ADI committee? No, I don't want to do your work. I've been doing this work and I have not had that conversation with anyone. No one has actually asked me, were you doing something similar to this before? No. So they need to have that conversation, and they need to they need to do an audit of their policies. And then they then need to then sit back and ask themselves, based on what we've found out now, and based on what we now know is the burden on the people who are underrepresented within our community, what is the best way to move forward so as not to overburden them? It's also funny to me how they think the solution is, if we offer them money, that should make it okay. No, I have enough money already. I'm a university professor. I get paid enough. The money doesn't make it easier for me. It still creates that tension of opportunity and burden. I want to talk, but offering me money doesn't mean that that's what's going to make me talk. It's actually become kind of annoying, to be honest, because it doesn't sort of address the underlying problem, which is there's a lot of people offering me a lot of money and I don't represent the culture, and my time is no longer my time. And you're actually pushing me away from the love of doing this for members of my community, right? And it's a cop-out for you as well, because if you keep asking Obaka, then you don't hire another Obaka.
Yes, actually, that's very true. And maybe my last question before we open it up to the comments. So I want to say, for anyone who has comments, please throw them into the chat and we will start getting to them. My last question would be, in the process that you laid out of sort of listening, auditing, reflecting that an organization can do, an institution can do, at that reflecting stage, individual defensiveness is the enemy of anti-racism work. How can individuals not personalize let's say the gaps that are identified or the actual barriers that they have put up themselves? How do we separate institutional defensiveness from anti-racism, from progressive anti-racism work?
Wow, it's a great question. So the defensiveness is in many ways, it's inbuilt. I think it's people don't like to be called out, especially if they think of themselves as persons who are allies and who are, who understand what you're saying. They don't like being called out. So I think there's just sort of three buckets of people you find in institutions. The three main buckets. They're the ones who, it doesn't matter what you say, they're just not connecting to this issue. They just don't think it's a problem. They're basically, they might as well be living under a rock for this issue. And then there are people who are allies in a very sort of shallow sense. They get the problem, but they're not going to speak up for it. And they certainly don't want you to personalize it. They don't want you to tell them they're part of the problem. And they're the ones who truly, they might as well be underrepresented themselves. They truly understand the problem, right? So I think the starting point for me is always to find those people who are in this third category and start to build from there and start to see if I can get them, to talk to other colleagues, and to see if we can start to sort of create a context where I'm not the only one speaking at faculty meetings, and I'm not the only one who, so I'm not getting these silences that tell me that I'm not sure if they're listening or not listening, but also that they don't think that this moment is about them. I think that's really important. I think that people need to recognize that when someone is saying, this is not okay, it's not personal. We're trying to, I don't want my colleagues so much to change as I want my institution to change. It's not about you. I want the entire society to change and recognize that this is a problem. So they need to sort of don't jump to defense. Don't tell me to validate my experiences. When I say this is what happened to me, don't go, maybe that was the reason why it happened to you. Just listen. I'm trying to sort of relate to you a bigger problem than you. And I think working with true allies to try and sort of get even just that fundamental message that it's not an attack on you so much as it's an attack or calling out of an institution, that's where we need to focus on. But it's very difficult. I couldn't. What makes it difficult mainly, I think, is because I think we're at the stage now where people are not being reflective. They just want to put something on the table to show that they identify with the problem. And most of it some of it are gaffes, like just straight up gaffes, the things that they shouldn't have done. Others are things that are going to fail, but they're not going to give you the chance to actually explain to them why it's going to fail. So it's really difficult.
Thank you for that and your insight. So I will jump into comments. We have quite a few comments coming in. So the first question is, when you refer to they, who are you referring to?
So I'm using they to mean institutions. Northwest College, University of Alberta, the government of Alberta, institutions that we expect, I think will represent most of the change that we need right now. They, for me, so much doesn't represent individuals, even though I think individuals are part of the day. But I'm somebody who really believes that institutional change is what we need to drive societal change. Institutions, when they lead properly, will get their individuals within them to follow along. We have anti-racist institutions and anti-racist systems because these systems and institutions don't have policies that coach the people who work within them and who exist within them on how to not be racist. So it refers to institutions and to governments and all of that. But at the same time, I think it also refers to white people as a collective and as people who sort of enjoy the most power in these situations and the most privilege in these situations.
Thank you for that. The next question is, and it's a two-part question. I'm wondering whether forms such as job applications that explicitly ask for applicants' nationality or ethnicity feel inclusive to marginalized groups, or whether they reinforce exclusion. Namely, if you're hired and you disclose that you're part of a minority group, does that feel like tokenism? And does that impact your self-worth or knowing that you were hired because you weren't hired because of your skills or assets?
This is a tough one. It's tough because there's so much underrepresentation. So you want them to do sort of targeted hiring. But I think, and I think I tweeted about this a few days ago, I think focusing on the ads is the wrong approach. I think you can put out a generic ad and still hire Black people, So I don't think it's about the ad. I think it's about where they advertise the ads, the qualifications that the sort of the tokens of exclusion that they put in these ads. If you're calling for a certain kind of, especially in educational institutions, if you saying we need people with PhDs, or we need people who have certain qualifications or who have certain experiences, you may be excluding by the way you express the ad. But even if you put out a generic ad, if you really want to sort of hire Black people, you can put out the ad that says we want people, and then hire Black people. As I tweeted a few days ago, our institutions are made up mainly of white people, not because somebody said in the ad, we want white people. So I'm not somebody who supports, necessarily saying we're out to hire Black people, because I think it creates stigma. I don't want to be called a diversity hire. I don't want to be in an institution where people go, oh, were you hired because you're Black? But I do want to be hired. So I think the two ways what I'll recommend is put the ads where persons who are underrepresented look for jobs, right? That may not be, jobs.com. It may have to be, posting an ad at the African Center. That could be an approach. So it doesn't matter so much what's on the ad, but where you put the ad, and also a commitment that if you don't get applicants that make you more inclusive and better represented in terms of diversity, that you can have a failed job search and then go again, or you can use there are actually firms everywhere that help people recruit. If you say to a job search firm, find me, people who are part of the underrepresented group, they will find you that. So I think many people who talk about the ad, I think it's mainly a cop-out, really, to be honest. I don't think the ad is the problem. I think it's just not a commitment, a deeper commitment to actually hiring in certain ways.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Our next question is, I've heard many times from others that the word ally or allyship is not respectful. Could you share with us what you think is respectful?
There's so many terms out there right now. I think you're always going to get people challenge whatever terms you're using. I know many of these terms are contested. BIPOC is contested. Racialized is contested. There are no terms that are not contested. It's every term is contested. I like to not. For me, I'm a person who I learn as I go along. If somebody tells me this term is not what I want for you to use, I try to understand why that is, and I go, okay, what would you prefer me to use? I'm very much into tell me what you want me to use, and I'll use it, because at the end of the day, I want you to feel like you're part of a conversation that we're in and that we're having. So I can't say if the word ally or allyship is respectful or not. To some it will be, to some it wouldn't. But the message behind the word is that you're willing to share something with people who are affected by the problem. And whatever that thing is a good thing. Even if it's just listening, it's a good thing. And so it's better than somebody who is not an ally. So I'm not going to argue with the term, because I want you to be an ally, or whatever term you're using that suggests friendship. And then we can talk about how your friendship is going to manifest in the work I'm trying to do on anti-racism.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Our next question is, how do we encourage people to be better, braver, and more respectful allies? Using the word allies.
So I think this is one of those things where there's so many strategies to this, depending on who you're dealing with, right? It's going to vary depending on who you're dealing with. I think if you're dealing with someone who is worried, who doesn't actually sort of understand what the whole thing is about, what is this anti-racism thing about, that's an uphill task. You might as well. I don't know how you talk to those kind of people, to be honest. But if you're dealing with someone who already sort of understands the problem, but does not know how they are going to help, I think one thing you could say to them is, support me, right? Support me. One of the things that especially in institutions, in academic institutions, one of the things that I have been shocked by is how months into this movement, I am now the only one still speaking up about these issues. It has come down to just me in the faculty. And I would just like for someone to just say, you know what? I'm behind what Obaka just said. If you feel that way, or if you don't, to say, well, you know what, Obaka, that's not how I see this, so you and I can have a conversation. The silence is really bothering me. And I don't think there's much you can lose by either agreeing or disagreeing with me. It's the silences that bother me, really. Like, say, I go when I'm not sure where anyone stands on anything. And then the next time, like, we're chatting like we're friends, but I'm like, why did you not say something? Challenge me or agree with me or support me. So I think a better, braver, more respectful ally is one who is not quiet in the face of something this serious. Black people are not always right. I'm not always right. You can tell me when I'm not, and you can say that openly. But if you think I'm right, you should support me. Sitting there quietly really messes with my head, to be honest.
Being cognizant that we have 9 minutes left, I wanted to ask a question from my end. Is being silent complicit? If you're silent in these conversations, are you complicit to the systems?
I don't know that you're complicit so much as, I mean, complicit is I think it's a very loaded term. You may be negligent, but I don't know that you're complicit. Well, not even negligent. I mean, there are many reasons why people don't, let's not forget that this problem is also intersectional. There are many reasons why people are silent. I don't mean to suggest that silence is always a bad thing. We know, for example, that, silence can also be like internalized racism. It can be internalized sexism. There's many ways silence manifests, and we need to really understand it. But I don't. So I wouldn't go as far as saying it's complicity. But I don't know that it's okay in a moment like this where we are all feeling vulnerable about what's going on, that you allow me to be the lone voice in this, and then meet me for drinks after and tell me how much you respect what I just said. If you respect it, say it. So that I can have some support. But I wouldn't say, that silence is part of, for some, it'll be part of creating the system because they don't actually believe in what I'm saying. But for others, it could just be that it's a different thing they're trying to avoid. They're feeling vulnerable too. They're feeling vulnerable because they don't share the power that certain people have to be able to sort of speak openly about these matters.
Thank you for that. And maybe our last question, tying it back to Northwest College. Northwest College is actively pursuing and creating and implementing both an EDI strategy and an anti-racism strategy that intersect in many parts, but also diverge in some sections. So in a college that is taking the active steps to resource the initiatives, to resource sort of people coming in and leading this work, so it's not at the side of somebody's desk and it's not putting the ownership on people, what would you encourage are some clear next steps that we should take as an organization to continue down this process, or some oversights that other institutions have done that are pitfalls to anti-racism and EDI work?
Well, I mean, I think I have to understand better what Northwest is doing before I can actually sort of offer any guidance on this. But the one thing I can say is, generally, I think these institutions need to sort of withdraw from knee-jerk reactions. Nobody's trying to win the race of where the best EDI institution right now in this moment, right? And I think that's actually where the race that we're in now. Everyone wants to show that they're really on the ball, and it's not allowing space for reflection, for self-examination, for audit, for bringing in people who understand the problem, who are expert to advise. Everyone is there's a rash of actions going on and it's ending nowhere. We actually, I suspect I'm not making a dent in this problem for that reason, but everyone is into it now. So I think if I had to offer sort of a general advice is stop and count, audit, reflect, self-examine, consult, and then develop a strategy that is based on real action. So I'll give an example. I work in a place where there's only 2 Black students in an entire faculty. There's only 1 Black faculty member. There is, the other sort of racialized students in the faculty, there's not a lot. They struggle with getting employment, right? And 1 year into this movement, this was a problem that existed before this movement, but 1 year into this movement, we've not even acknowledged this as a problem. But we have EDI policies out already. We have all the right things have been said. If they could put, if there was a Black flag, they would fly it in front of our faculty. But the real problem is our students are underrepresented and are not getting jobs. And that is not even on the radar yet. So there's some kind of disconnect between action and performance that's going on. And I think that's because everyone just decided, oh my God, there's a problem, let's do something, without actually stepping back to say, okay, how does the problem manifest in my organization? What are the areas where I haven't seen this problem before? And am I the problem? And we haven't had that. We've kind of skipped that stage. We need to go back to it. Because I think if we go back to it, if they stop asking me to be on committees, maybe I can tell them what I just told you, which is we have students here who consistently don't get jobs. Maybe we can solve that, right? But they're just asking me to be on committees now. So is there EDI work, not the work I'm actually doing and I want to do?
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think we'll stop it there. Dr. Ogbogu, thank you so much for coming to Norquest, sharing your perspective, bringing not only the insight that you carry professionally, but also the transparency in how your personal life and your own identity interacts with the work that you're going to do, have been doing, and now people are amplifying in many different ways. As Norquest College, we're very committed to looking at this holistically and in that listening process of taking a step back. So I thank you so much for coming, being our final Black History Month speaker. We really appreciate this, and we look forward as Norquest College of continuing the spirit of Black History Month even outside of February, and continuing these conversations so it doesn't begin and end in February 1st to February 28th. So thank you so much. We look forward to meeting again, hopefully in real life one day.
Of course,
and
yeah.
Thank you again, and thank you everyone for your insightful questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me either through Teams or via email. And I think that's that. Any last questions? Any last comments?
Thank you, Nadira. Thank you so much, Norquest College. Thanks, everyone. This was great. Thank you so much.